All right, so folks, what you just saw were statistics that, based on your government entity's characteristics, provides a pretty clear picture on how you might be allocating your ARPA and your ESSER dollars. And if you dig a little bit deeper into those statistics, it also provides a glimpse into some of the challenges that you're facing. For an example, no matter what type of government entity you are, wages and hiring was one of your top four priorities. And the reason because of that is everybody is short on labor. Another top four priority allocation was capital improvements. Why? Well, because ARPA and ESSER has provided government entities with the means to accomplish capital improvements that they've needed for a very long time. But it just simply wasn't possible before the pandemic. You didn't have the funds to do it. But I think before you get involved with a capital improvement program, you need to be aware of some of the challenges that are taking place within the construction market. So before the pandemic, and I think this is important, before the pandemic, there was an inherent truth about construction, and that you could really always kind of count on. And it was that the number one reason for project overruns is because there was because of either extended timelines or delays within the construction process, right? You could always count on that even before the pandemic. And if it was true then, let me show you a couple statistics that makes it even truer today. Now, this is the Producer Price Index. This comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is really providing you an index of the 7 most commonly used categories of construction, right? And so if you look at steel, you can see that steel is up, I believe that's 124% over the last 2 years, since May of 2020 to June of 2022. Look at the purple line. That's lumber and plywood. That's up roughly 61%. Go down to truck transportation at 40%. That's just to get your material and labor, or I'm sorry, your material and equipment on site. Let's take a look at supply chains, right? So you've all heard of the headlines. You know that there's a chip shortage. You know that there's a war in Ukraine, that China has a no COVID policy. You understand that there's global instability, but there's also smaller underlying problems that are causing just as many problems within the supply chain. So logistics is one of them. And logistics is really a mixed bag right now. For example, in September, we just hit a new trucker shortage, and it's a record. We're short 80,000 truckers. Port congestion has improved a little bit. Your cargo ships right now are only waiting 5 to 6 days to unload. Once they've unloaded, the containers are sitting in port for about 6 to 8 days before they can catch rail to go inland. But once you get inland, that's where you run into the shortage of truckers. So that's a problem. Even more concerning than that is there's a railroad union the railroad union is threatening to go on strike. Now, the good news is that date was extended from November 28th, when they were talking about their strike deadline, to December 9th. But the point being is, if this doesn't get resolved soon, you're going to hear about it. It's going to be in the headlines. This could be a very large problem from a supply chain issue. This comes from Gartner Supply Data Matrix, and you can see February of 21, 89% of equipment deliveries were on time. In July, that number shrank to 65%. When you look at February 21, the average lead time for equipment was roughly 21 days. As of July, that's gone up to 44 days. So it's heading in the wrong direction. Here's a statistic from what I think most of you are familiar with, the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, the OFCC. If you were to build a new government building utilizing the Ohio Design Manual, your cost to install HVAC is doubled from 2018 to 2022. That's an incredible increase. I mean, it went from $26 a square foot to install HVAC to $49 a square foot for HVAC. Here's more data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and everyone has, I think this kind of resonates a little bit with you because everyone has a problem with labor right now. But from a construction perspective, the labor shortage goes even deeper. It's getting worse. And this kind of shows you right here. So in April of 2020 to June of 2020, in 3 months, the construction industry lost almost 1.5 million workers. And the problem that you'll see is that non-residential construction never really recovered. We're still short 134,000 employees. So, and let's touch on this graph because I think this really kind of even puts it in more of a perspective. In the 22 years that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has tracked this data, these two lines have never inverted. In May, there were more job openings than there was new hires. On top of that, look at the construction jobs that are in Ohio's pipeline. I mean, you have Intel, that's a $20 billion project. That's the largest construction project in the state's history. So where are we going to get this skilled labor from, right? So that's a challenge that we're facing as well. So, these are the challenges we're facing from our side of the table. But some of these problems are also really part of your problem because these are things that neither you or I can control, and they're eventually going to trickle down to you. So if we circle back to that number one reason why there's cost overruns, folks, your construction timeline, and I think this is important, your construction timeline doesn't start when the shovel hits the dirt. It starts way before that. It starts when you as the owner begin to consider a capital improvement project. So if you're going to implement a capital improvement project, what does your process look like? And let's look at it from an HVAC renovation perspective. How many months from start to finish does it take? So let's assume that you as the owner say, hey, this is something that we want to take a look at. You're going to go back to your administration. You're going to run those capital improvement ideas by them, get their feedback. You're going to take it then to your board or your city council, right? You're going to get their feedback. At that point in time, they say, yeah, you know what? Maybe we should take a look at it. At which point you're going to turn around and maybe seek out some subject matter experts. Maybe you're bringing in an architect. Maybe you're looking at an engineer. You ask them to provide you with some preliminary scope, a preliminary budget. Once they've done that, you take it back to your board or your city council, and they say, yeah, let's move forward. That's something that we can do. And now this is when things start getting serious. So now you're issuing out an RFQ or RFP for an architect or an engineer. They begin to make that selection. They begin the design. At that point, you're issuing out an RFQ for a construction manager at risk. Architect gets done designing, puts it in construction documents, hands it to the CM. Maybe there's some revisions to scope and cost at that point. And then the shovel hits the dirt. Then your construction process begins, right? So how long would that take you? I think we could say maybe if we're just to give it a range, 20 to 36 months, I think that's fair. So, and then backing up, here's another question for you. Realizing that every government entity buys or has a different buying process. But if you go back before the pandemic, some of you were using state term schedules, group purchasing organizations, council of governments to buy, and you did it regularly. But during the pandemic or to even now, how many of you recognize the impact of buying through a group purchasing organization or a council of governments over the last 2 years? Whether it's buses, cleaning supplies, professional services, whatever, the speed in which you can buy and buy at a competitively bid, negotiated price Those were nice features to have before the pandemic. They're even more so today. Because if you if you take that 20 to 36 month construction timeline, and if you can condense that into 8 to 10 months, there's savings there. I mean, think back to the OFCC statistic from 2008 to 2022, your cost for HVAC is double. And in this example, by shaving 10 to 28 months off your process, that is something you can control. You can't necessarily control inflationary rates on equipment or supply chains and logistics. You can't control that, but you can control how you buy. And so, let me touch on the compliance, and I don't want to get into it too much because the previous speaker did a very good job of describing the compliance parameters on how you can use ARPA and ESSER dollars under a group purchasing organization. But the fact is that when you read federal guidance where it states that the non-federal entity is encouraged to enter into a state and local intergovernmental agreement or inter-entity agreement where appropriate, it's the federal guidance that is telling you that not only is it allowed, but they're actually encouraging it. So, folks, if you have procurement responsibilities in your organization, you know that you are buying differently today than you were before the pandemic. Some of you have changed the way you buy a little bit. Some of you have changed the way you buy a lot. But the fact remains that specifically in today's market, if you're going to be a good buyer, you have to buy efficiently. And while there are other considerations that you can take to reduce cost and lead times, the absolute best way is to compress the time in which you begin considering a capital improvement to completing the capital improvement project. It's your first line of defense. So